Hey, psst. Your family isn't in the room, are they? If they are, casually take me with you, and I want you to leave the room. Because for the next few minutes, I want to get real with you about your family. I mean, there's something I know about your family, and Jesus certainly knows it about your family. They're sometimes hard to live with, aren't they? Hey gang, we're in chapter 3 of the book of Mark, and have you noticed that more and more as the story goes on, Jesus finds himself in crowds. In fact, in chapter 3, he's bombarded by a crowd of people from all over who gather around him. He's on the lakeshore. Then another crowd gathers a few verses later. Verse 20 says, "Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd, they gathered, so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat." Now, here's what's interesting. Standing there in that crowd, Jesus does something that feels rather jarring. Did you catch it? Jesus says something that seems to be totally out of character for Jesus. Someone tells Jesus that his mother and his brothers are looking for him. Then Jesus, he responds sort of flippantly, sort of like a snotty middle schooler. He says, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" Yikes. I mean, that's kind of like when you get a phone call and you see on your phone it says potential spam, so you hit ignore. Except this is Jesus, and he's snubbing his mother and his brothers. I want to say to Jesus, Jesus, whatever happened to honor your mother and father? Well, folks, here's what we know. Sometimes family is hard, isn't it? I mean, sometimes family is really hard. We see it throughout the Bible. From the very beginning of the Bible to the very end, we see example after example. Think for a minute about the story of Adam and Eve. They had that classic dysfunctional relationship. And because of that, they were expelled from the garden. Noah's family landed. They landed the ark on dry land. And the first thing Noah does is he gets drunk and he gets naked. Talk about embarrassing for his sons. Abraham and Sarah, they didn't trust God, that God would give them a child. And so Abraham has a child with their servant. Folks, wherever you look in the Bible, all the great families, they were all a mess. But here's what I love. Even though those families were hard, they were a mess, even though, our families are hard and a mess, God has this thing for families. I mean, think about it. Adam and Eve, they're expelled from the garden, but did you notice they are expelled together? God keeps their family intact, as broken and as flawed as it is. God saved Noah and his family, even though Noah's judgment was horribly impaired. Abraham and Sarah, they make a big mess of things, yet God is faithful to them, God's promises. Here's what God knows. Families are misguided. Families are nutty. Families are messy. Families are hard. And yet families are chosen by God. So why does Jesus seem to depart from this? Why his seemingly snide comment? Remember what he said? "Who are my mother and my brothers?" Here's what I think. Have you ever seen that old movie, City Slickers? In that movie, there's this wrangler, this crusty guy named Curly, and he has this classic line where he holds up his index finger and says, "There's just one thing." Do you remember that? I think Jesus is saying there's just one thing that's central to understanding the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is your primary family. The kingdom of God is a family we all belong to. The kingdom of God is a family in which we all get to claim full inheritance. We're all adopted through Jesus. Our adoption papers are signed in his blood. Again and again in the book of Mark, we're going to see the crowds keep appearing around Jesus. And when they do, I want you to remember, in the kingdom of God, they're all family. And you and me, we're family too. Got a couple questions for you as we close today. The first question goes like this. How do you define family? What does family look like for you? And second, who do you believe can become a part of Jesus' family? Is anybody barred from joining that family?